Welcome to our program. I'm Don Pritchard, and joining me we have Tim Good, who's the new superintendent of the St. Genevieve National Historic Park, which is just barely getting started in its infancy, and you are the interim superintendent at this point in time. Tim Good, welcome to our program.
Well, Don, thanks so much for having me on. Thanks for your public service to the community. I really appreciate that. And I just want to emphasize again how much the community has, with open arms, greeted the National Park Service. We're looking forward to the establishment of the park in maybe 6 to 12 months, and looking forward to greeting new visitors, not only from the United States, but from around the world, to learn about the remarkable history of St. Genevieve.
Now, I know it's starting with just a few properties at the outset. And I think one of the properties is already transferred.
Well, currently we're working on the Amaro House,
Yes.
working with the state, and we expect, if everything continues as it's progressing, sometime next year to have possession of the Amaro House. And that's one of the requirements for the establishment of the park. Also looking at some other properties to see what might be available as well.
I've heard that despite being down on St. Mary's Road, which is where the Amaro House is, and also the Beckett-Rebow, which is another candidate, I'm sure, you would like to have a presence in the historic district downtown.
That's a great point, Don. We have seen that the historic downtown area will probably be the focus for most visitors. So in recognition of that, we are looking at properties we might have there in order to orient and attract visitors and give them a fuller experience of St. Genevieve, and of course encourage them to visit properties on St. Mary's Road.
I know there was talk just recently of the former building, or the current building, of the St. Genevieve Museum, which will soon become the Museum Learning Center down on Market Street, that building could be a good headquarters for the St. Genevieve Park. Any confirmation or thoughts on that?
Well, there are two aspects of establishing a park that we're especially sensitive to. First of all is parking. But after a Park Service team visited here, we felt there was sufficient parking in the historic area. We're very encouraged by that. And secondly, looking for office space. And the St. Genevieve Museum right now certainly has the space available. So that is one of the buildings we are looking at for possible office space. And additionally, we're also looking for space that might be conducive for a visitor center.
And I know that it's been mentioned before in the past in conversations with some of the other folks in town that the Creole House, which is located on St. Mary's Road, just adjacent, I think, to the Beckett-Rebow House, has been proposed as that visitor center. What do you think?
Yeah, that, again, St. Genevieve has a wealth of historic resources, and especially places that could serve as visitor centers or office space. Creole House was actually in the legislative boundary, so it's certainly something the Park Service can look at. And when establishing a park, we also have maintenance areas, which we need as well. The Creole House has some wonderful advantages for that. So we're trying to look at all these different areas. And to the point you made earlier, Don, which I thought was very good, we expect that this park has the potential to gradually expand over time. So although you may see the Park Service acquire some property initially, that should not be viewed as all the property the Park Service may acquire in the future. And there's also the possibility of leasing some property as well.
I know that, as you mentioned, most of the folks in town are just thrilled to death to have the National Park Service have a presence in St. Genevieve. The one or two naysayers that I've heard has said, well, the National Park Service is going to take over the town. It's just going to take over. And how would any acquisitions be made?
Well, and it's an excellent question. And one of the initial aspects that really impressed me about St. Genevieve was the public meeting. I've been in the Park Service almost 30 years, dozens of public meetings. This is the first time I ever attended a public meeting when nobody spoke up in opposition to a Park Service option. It made a great impression on me as well as the congressional staff. This is an extreme rarity. In terms of how the Park Service may progress on acquisition of property, it may be donated to the Park Service, the legislation allows that, or it may be sold. And when a property is sold to the Park Service, we receive a third-party appraisal and offer the purchase price based on that. The Park Service has no intention of using any type of condemnation proceedings whatsoever. We will only acquire property where the property owner is willing to pass it on to the National Park Service. Another aspect I want to emphasize regarding the open arms with which we've been greeted, we anticipate the Park Service is not going to purchase massive amount of property. Instead, we're joining a family, an existing family that is dedicated to historic preservation. And we've seen that at the county level, the state level, the city level, among a variety of nonprofits and individuals. And that was a huge part in the Park Service deciding to positively recommend St. Genevieve as a new National Park Service site.
It really impressed the congressional hearing when we had visitors from St. Genevieve attending that meeting in costume.
That's an excellent point, Don. And in fact, initially, to have the legislation to do the study, St. Genevieve sent residents there in period costume. They were there then for the House hearing, and I believe it was the Congresswoman from Hawaii that was so impressed by that. She pointed to the mayor, Paul, who did a fantastic job, and said, would you introduce them? And I thought Paul did a marvelous job introducing them. And again, that's not something you typically see in the halls of Congress, but shows the passion and dedication of this community for its American history.
I think that's very true, and I think it's reflective of the honest feelings of the people toward the city. Of course, there are, as I mentioned, some occasional naysayers you see on social media who did not attend the public meeting, I'm sure, but nonetheless, they're out there, and so we have to allay their suspicions and concerns as much as we can.
Well, that's a good
I
point.
think the proof is going to be in the pudding, as they say.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And as time goes on, I think you will see the Park Service will be administering itself as part of a family and working together. And in all fairness, in those parks that I have seen that are the most successful, it's those that have collaborated with the community that have achieved the highest goals. Because there are some things that the community can achieve better than the Park Service. So having them accomplish a particular goal would be better for all of us. Some things the Park Service could achieve better. But it's looking at all the resources available and working together as a team is where we have the strongest parks and the strongest experience for the Park Service visitor.
Exactly. Going forward, how important will be the Heritage Commission? This is the commission that has the design guidelines that wants to preserve and protect the existing stock of historic homes, and that it's taken a lot of heat over the years. And I'm just wondering, does the National Park Service presence really underscore the importance of this Heritage Commission?
Well, that commission was one of the factors that impressed the Park Service team, the fact that the community supports a commission of that sort. We intend to have no direct interaction with the commission, and our historic preservation efforts will be primarily centered on the properties we actually own. But the legislation provides us with the opportunity to provide technical assistance to help people interpret their homes, help them in the preservation of their homes. But again, I see the commission as an example of the city's leadership in historic preservation, and certainly we're certainly appreciative of all those efforts on the individual and the governmental level to preserve this extraordinary American history, a history that exists nowhere else.
Exactly.
And there's nothing like this in the park system. This really breaks the mold. We have ample examples of national parks that center on one historic building, but not one that has dozens available. So I think it's really exciting to watch this develop and see what interest we will gain both nationally and internationally. And again, having this government support at all levels and in the community, I think it's going to be a huge part in the success of this park.
And I'm sure the Heritage Commission members are feeling this as greatly improving their stature, maybe their status even, because of the fact that now we're going to have a National Park Service presence. And I think the federal government in the past, while I've been in St. Genevieve, has made two huge decisions for this community. One was the federal levy. In 1993, this town came within that much of losing quite a bit. And that would have been devastating, of course, and the rebuilding process would have been horrendous. But we saved it. And shortly after that, the federal government approved the construction of that levee. And then the second thing would be the arrival of National Park Service.
Right.
I think those two are going to go down in history as the biggest significant happenings regarding our federal government.
Well, I really appreciate you mentioning the flood, Don. I could not agree with you more. That was a pivotal moment, and the Park Service study team was sincerely impressed by the fact that the Corps of Engineers made the determination that the levee could not be justified on economic reasons alone, but rather on historical. And so we already had a federal agency that had made a decision recognizing the historic significance of St. Genevieve. And again, that heavily influenced the Park Service study team on how important this place was. So I couldn't agree with you more. That flood was a pivotal moment. And having the national park system here, having this place be part of the national park system, America is saying that this is as important as the Statue of Liberty, Battle of Gettysburg, Grand Canyon. It joins a family with those other units. And so it elevates it to a national plane it has not had before. So time will tell whether the establishment of a national park will have an impact as great as the flood. But I completely agree with you. That flood's impact, the levee, the Corps' determination has already had an effect, and in my opinion, will have a permanent effect on recognizing the importance of this city.
Let's talk about the benefits of having the National Park Service here. A lot of people in the community, many people have watched our population figures since I've been here change maybe 1 or 2 digits.
Right.
I mean, it really has not grown. And I've been told there are people who like it like that, who just want to keep the town a small village and they enjoy it that way. There are others who'd like to see some growth. Obviously, one area of growth that we're going to talk about is the tourism industry that we've had in town. And over the years, it has gradually increased. And more and more people become aware of it, not only in America, but overseas as well.
Absolutely.
Tell me, in your estimation, in your opinion, what will that arrowhead on the highway do for St. Genevieve?
It's fascinating. If you look at the history of the National Park System, some of the original Park Service directors actually worked in private industry, actually extraction industries out west. And their main supporters in the establishment of many of the parks were the railroads, because they recognized if these were established, that would bring visitors there. And so from the very inception of the agency, that idea of heritage tourism was present and has been a driver through the establishment of national park units to this day. So I would say there's no question you have more visitors will come here. I will be most fascinated to see what the numbers will be. Since we don't have anything like this in the system, I really don't have a good example to follow in terms of estimating exactly how many people will be here. For example, the former site I was the superintendent of, the U.S. Grant site in St. Louis, almost had 60,000 visitors last year. And so you could easily presume if you have one historic building and you have multiple ones down here, you could easily attract 60,000. I would hope so, but I'm not sure. The close proximity to the interstate is a huge advantage. There are no National Park Service sites between St. Louis and Memphis. I think that provides St. Genevieve with another advantage. And just the north-south traffic passing here, it would be naturally conducive for people. An hour from St. Louis, let's take a break, let's visit here. They see the national park and hopefully are inspired to see multiple buildings here. But as the visitation numbers on the first and successive years, I would expect them to increase. I'll be most curious to see what our initial numbers are and how much they increase over time.
And of course, that could lead to economic development.
Sure.
Hopefully that would not affect the historic district.
Right, exactly.
But certainly the area surrounding the historic district, we can see development of some, I know a lot of people would like to see some chain restaurants in town, some more hotels and motels, amenities for visitors.
Yeah, the three industries that usually are immediately impacted by a Park Service establishment are the gas stations, your hotels, motels, B&Bs, and also your restaurants. And in looking at other cities, they've developed formulas demonstrating the economic impact is substantially greater if visitors are encouraged to stay overnight.
Sure.
If you're a 2-day place, the economic impact is far greater than if somebody just comes in for the single day. And in all fairness, Don, St. Genevieve has some wonderful amenities which could encourage that.
Oh, yeah.
Between the wineries, the new water park opening, there's some talk about having some trails. These are the type of activities together that attract families to stay multiple days, or senior citizens or others. So you already have some wonderful assets in place that can take advantage of the National Park Service establishment.
Of course, economic development, more tourists, more visitors means more sales tax revenue for the community and ability to maybe fix some potholes here and there. St. Genevieve has long been known as, unfortunately, a town that has a lot of roads that are in less than perfect ideal condition. what can the Park Service do from the start with improving access to the Park Service area?
Well, that's a great question, Don, because there is a Federal Department of Transportation grant program that provides funds to local communities specifically for roads or trails that lead to national parks. The funding is restricted. It cannot be used inside a national park site, but can be used for any arteries that lead to it. So here's an example of when the park is established. The agency can work with the local community to apply for grants to address roads, trails, sidewalks, whatever the community thinks is interested in, to help improve those, not only for the park visitors, but also for the community itself.
That's great news. That's great news. Have you already taken a look at access routes to the park?
Well, again, this will be another aspect I'll be most fascinated to watch. What will be the tourist patterns? Will they come in on St. Mary's Road? Will they come in right down Main Street? How will they drive here? RVs, other vehicles, where will they park? Where will they go? And because you have multiple sites and spread out over a fairly good-sized area, I'm just curious to see what patterns do develop. Again, if you had one building, Don, one parking lot,
It'd be easy.
I can predict exactly how they're going to go. But since you have multiple ways for them to come in, and who knows, some people may also decide to travel through Illinois and take the ferry as part of the experience and enter the community through there. Again, since you have two exits off the interstate, which they can choose from, and you could see multiple patterns of them arriving at the city and visiting the different historic sites. I'll be most interested to see how that turns out.
Let's talk about possibilities.
Sure.
We're going to dream now. We're going to put the crystal ball on. 5, 10, 15 years. What do you see?
In watching other national parks develop, there was a particular period over decades where I would describe the local community's knowledge of the park as fairly limited. And then eventually it reached some point, and it's different for each park, Don, where suddenly there's an awakening and the situation changes overnight. I'll give you an example of a park I used to work at, Cuyahoga Valley National Park. It runs between Cleveland and Akron. It's one of the 10th most visited parks in the system. Initially, when it was established, the community was aware of it, but not all the advantages. Eventually, developers and realtors started realizing that a house along a park boundary, you can look out your back window and forever see a national park. You never have to worry about any development there. And so you began to see developments and housing projects right along the park boundary as they recognized what incredible value this was to the community. But again, that did not occur initially, and it's taken over time. And now, as I say, it's one of the 10th most visited parks in the system, and the vast majority of their visitation is local. They've embraced it as their park. They come there to jog, hike, bike, and they're at the point now where the river is cleaned up to the point where they're now looking at river activities, which was never foreseen when the park was first established. So here, I think you could see a similar situation. The one of the aspects I'm especially interested to see over time is how long it takes for the American public to recognize the value of these French vertical log buildings. There's a limited supply. There will never be any more. And I could foresee the situation in the future where people end up realizing the limited supply and actually start purchasing it, again, from around the country or around the world, to say that they own one of these remarkable remnants of American history. And so you could see a change in that aspect as well. Now, of course, there is, I would suggest, not as great of appreciation of these buildings as perhaps there might be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But, some places on the East Coast, some of these colonial buildings, they have that appreciation. They recognize the historic value of these. And when these houses, are put up for sale, they receive substantial interest because of the history associated with them. And this is perhaps something that could happen with St. Genevieve if that awareness for their importance increases and that attracts attention from throughout the nation. Again, having it in the national park system helps because you're saying that these buildings are nationally significant. And so that could help draw that level of interest.
Okay. Let's talk about the river. Mississippi River flows past St. Genevieve. Yet from most locations in St. Genevieve, you cannot see the river.
Yes.
Our river access is limited.
Yes.
And I know that's outside the National Park Service area, but I'm just wondering, is this a possible catalyst for some movement toward some kind of facilities on the river? At least a way to go to the river and look at it in a pleasant surrounding?
Well, I'll say this much. We haven't studied the river activities as much, but to your point, Don, which it would be a tragedy if people forgot about this. St. Genevieve is here because of the river.
That's right.
So the more that we recognize the connection between the river and the city, its development, its settlement, I think a stronger interpretive story we make. And in so doing, if we impress visitors with that, I think they will be much more likely to go visit the Mississippi and stand there and look at it and imagine what it was like when the first Frenchmen came up here and decided to settle here and farm here and mine here. And so I could very well see the possibility of people being drawn to the river because of the Park Service interpretation in the historic area.
And so we need some kind of facilities.
Well,
Some kind
again,
of, at the very outset, at least an observation point.
well, again, I'll be interested to see what the visitor patterns are.
Yeah.
And the Park Service, in some cases, we have constructed facilities with full confidence that this is where visitors would travel, and later discovered that our original estimation was not correct. And some very smaller facilities, which are much closer to the resource, end up being the more popular ones. So I would suggest that there's a certain, patience is not always an easy thing, but to wait, let's see what the visitors are interested in, and then invest resources. They will tell us. You will get that feedback, and you
Sure.
will watch the trails.
Yep.
One of my best examples on college campuses, you will see the sidewalks that the administration determined, and then you will see the paths that the college students
Yes.
took anyways. And so I think taking that and applying
Yeah.
that here, let's see what fascinates the visitors. One of the challenges in the national park system is sometimes we're too close to the painting. And it's hard for us to step back and see exactly what fascinates them about a particular story in a particular place. And again, back to that patience idea, just waiting to see what marvels them about this, what brings them back. And then, when we have some years of patterns, being able to then provide the amenities that they would like to help them enjoy the issues, the topics that are drawing them here to the first place.
Very good. Well, we'd like to see a lot of development. We'd like to see the economy in St. Genevieve boom. We'd like to see our sales tax revenue go up. We'd like to have nice, smooth streets throughout, and hopefully the National Park Service can be the tipping point to bring that to reality. And that's what I think a lot of folks are hoping for. And Tim, it's good to talk to you. And when do you think you'll find out about the interim part of your title?
I think a lot of it will be dependent on when the park's first established, and hope to obviously get to the point where we actually establish a place where we can identify as a visitor center, eventually start hiring staff. So I've thoroughly enjoyed working on this project, and I'm happy to stay with it as long as the community has an interest in me being involved in it, and my supervisor as well. Because, again, there's no park like this in the system.
Yep.
And so watching this grow, watching this develop, again, with the strong community support, I think there's some wonderful days ahead for St. John.
I think so too, and I thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Don.
Of course, Tim Good is a part-time because you are over at the Lincoln site in Springfield, which certainly gets a lot of visitors on its own.
Yeah, over 200,000 visitors a year there.
Well, if you just bring us a tenth of those, maybe.
Oh,
a month, maybe a month.
I'll try to steer them this way, Don.
Tim Good, he is the interim superintendent for the St. Genevieve National Historic Park, which is in the process, I guess we could say, of gestation right now.
Very well put.